My husband divorced me and made me lose everything at court, until I found an old envelope, and that's when he regretted everything he did to me. I'm Miranda and I'm 34 years old. I just lost everything in my divorce. My mansion, my children, and apparently my entire life as I knew it. Richard's lawyer smiled as the judge signed the papers, awarding him full custody because I had no means of financial support. I sat there in that courtroom wearing my best dress, watching my world crumble into nothing. 10 years. I gave that man everything while he built his empire. I managed our household, raised our children, organized his business dinners, and somehow convinced myself I was building something alongside him. What a fool I'd been. The prenup I'd signed at 24 came back to haunt me like a ghost I'd forgotten existed. Mrs. Hartwell. Judge Morrison's voice cut through my shock. Given your lack of employment history and current financial situation, the court finds it in the children's best interest to remain with their father. Emma's face flashed in my mind. My 8-year-old daughter who still needed me to braid her hair every morning. Tyler, my 6-year-old son, who had nightmares, and only I could calm him down. Your Honor, I started to speak, but my attorney touched my arm, silencing me. The decision was final. Richard had painted me as an unemployable housewife who contributed nothing to our marriage except spending his money. Never mind that I had an economics degree. Never mind that I'd sacrificed my career to support his. Walking out of that courthouse felt like walking through a cemetery. Everything I'd been for the past decade was buried in that room. The other wives in our social circle would whisper about me now. Poor Miranda, they'd say. She really should have seen this coming. But none of them would offer help. That's not how our world worked. Richard was already loading the children into his BMW when I reached the parking lot. Emma pressed her face against the window, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tyler didn't even look at me. At 6, he probably didn't understand why Mommy couldn't come home anymore. I mouthed I love you to Emma through the glass, but Richard pulled away before she could respond. Standing alone in that parking lot, clutching the keys to my Honda, the only thing Richard couldn't take because it was in my name from before our marriage, I realized I had exactly one place to go. The old country house my mother had left me 3 years ago. I'd never even spent a night there. It was supposed to be our weekend getaway project. But Richard always found excuses to avoid visiting the rundown shack in the middle of nowhere. The drive took 2 hours through winding mountain roads I barely remembered. When I finally pulled into the overgrown driveway, my heart sank even further. The Victorian farmhouse looked worse than I'd remembered. Paint peeling, shutters hanging crooked, and weeds growing through the porch boards. This was supposed to be my fresh start. This abandoned relic of my childhood, but it was mine. Richard's name was nowhere on the deed. For the first time in months, I owned something he couldn't touch. I grabbed my single suitcase from the back seat, pathetic how little I'd managed to salvage from my former life, and approached the front door. The key still worked, thank God. Inside smelled like dust and memories. Mom's furniture remained covered in white sheets like ghosts of happier times. The electricity worked barely, and the water ran brown for several minutes before clearing. I stood in what used to be Mom's kitchen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of starting over at 34 with nothing but a broken-down house and $1,200 in my checking account. That first night, I cried myself to sleep on Mom's old couch wrapped in a quilt she'd made before I was born. But when morning came, something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was the silence. No Richard criticizing my coffee. No kids fighting over toys. No schedule demanding my constant attention. For the first time in years, I could think clearly. I had 2 choices. Collapse under the weight of everything I'd lost, or figure out how to build something new. As I watched the sunrise through Mom's lace curtains, I chose to fight. I just had no idea how much my mother had already prepared me for this battle. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Well, the beginning of a plan anyway. First priority, make this house livable. Second priority, find a job. Third priority, prove to that judge I could provide a stable home for my children. Simple enough, right? I'd obviously never tried rebuilding a life from scratch before. I started with the basics. The ancient furnace wheezed to life after some creative encouragement involving a hammer and several prayers to the heating gods. The kitchen faucet leaked, but YouTube videos taught me enough plumbing to make it functional. Cleaning supplies from the dollar store in town became my weapons of choice against years of neglect. 3 days into my new life as a domestic warrior, Mrs. Henderson from next door appeared at my kitchen window. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, holding a casserole dish that smelled like heaven. "Your mother used to love my tuna noodle casserole." We sat at Mom's small kitchen table while I tried not to devour the entire dish in record time. "She was proud of you, you know," Mrs. Henderson said quietly. "Always talking about your college degree, how smart you were with numbers and such. Said you got that from her side of the family." "I haven't used my degree in over 10 years, I admitted, stirring my food to avoid eye contact. "Richard said I was more valuable at home." Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened. "Your mother never liked that boy. Said he was the type to take credit for other people's sunshine." The accuracy of that statement hit me like a physical blow. How had Mom seen in minutes what I'd missed for years? After she left, I found myself thinking about Mom's comment regarding my economics degree. I'd graduated summa cum laude, landed a job at a respected financial planning firm, and had real career prospects before Richard convinced me that marriage meant choosing between family and career. "The children need their mother," he'd said. "We can afford for you to stay home." What he really meant was that he needed a full-time staff member who worked for free. That afternoon, I drove into town to explore job opportunities. The results were predictably depressing. Most positions required recent experience I didn't have. The few that might consider me paid barely enough to cover gas money, let alone prove financial stability to a family court judge. "You might try the bank," suggested Carol at the town's only employment office. "They're looking for someone part-time, but it's not much money." Not much money was still more than no money, so I walked the 3 blocks to Mountain View Community Bank. The manager, a woman about my age named Patricia Walsh, looked skeptical when I explained my situation. 10 years out of the workforce is a long time," she said, reviewing my hastily printed resume. "And honestly, we need someone who can start immediately and work flexible hours." "I can do both," I said, probably sounding more desperate than confident. "I learn quickly, and I need this job." Something in my tone must have resonated because she studied me more carefully. "Tell me about your economics background," she said. "What did you focus on in school?" For the next 20 minutes, we discussed market analysis, investment principles, and financial planning strategies. I surprised myself by remembering more than I'd expected. My brain might have been dormant for a decade, but the knowledge was still there, waiting. "I'll give you a trial period," Patricia finally said. 3 days a week to start helping customers with basic accounts and loan applications. $15 an hour. If you work out, we'll discuss expanding your responsibilities. $15 an hour was a far cry from Richard's 6-figure income, but it felt like winning the lottery. Walking back to my car, I called Emma's school to ask about the custody situation. "Mr. Hartwell has enrolled them in Riverside Academy," the secretary informed me. Of course, he had. Private school 40 minutes from my house where he could monitor every interaction I might have with my own children. That evening, I sat in Mom's rocking chair on the front porch, calculating and recalculating my finances. Even with the bank job, proving financial stability would take months. The legal fees for challenging custody would drain my small savings. Richard knew exactly what he was doing, trapping me in a system designed to keep me powerless. As darkness fell, I noticed something strange. The porch light illuminated a section of siding that looked different from the rest. Newer somehow, though still old. I made a mental note to investigate in the morning. Old houses always had their secrets, but I was too exhausted to explore mysteries that night. Instead, I focused on the immediate future. Tomorrow, I would start my new job, begin rebuilding my professional reputation, and take the first small step toward getting my children back. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was mine, and for now, that had to be enough. Little did I know that Mom's house was about to reveal just how much she'd prepared for exactly this scenario. My first day at Mountain View Community Bank went better than expected. Patricia put me at the customer service desk, helping people with account questions and loan applications. It felt strange wearing my one good business outfit and pretending to be a competent professional when I felt like I was barely holding myself together. But something remarkable happened around midday. A young couple came in asking about a home loan. Clearly first-time buyers who were overwhelmed by the process. As I walked them through the application, explaining debt-to-income ratios and interest calculations, I felt a spark of my old self returning. I was good at this. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed making complex financial concepts understandable. "You really know your stuff," the husband said when we finished. "We were so confused before, but now it all makes sense." The compliment meant more than he could have imagined. For the first time in years, someone valued my knowledge rather than my ability to organize a dinner party or manage Richard's calendar. Patricia noticed my success with customers. "You're a natural at this," she said during my lunch break. "Have you considered getting your financial advisor certification? We could use someone who can help with investment planning." The suggestion planted a seed in my mind. Maybe this job could become something more than just surviving. After work, I stopped by the grocery store for supplies to continue renovating the house. The checkout clerk, a teenager with purple hair and multiple piercings, seemed unusually chatty. "You're Miranda, right? Mrs. Foster's daughter." When I nodded, she smiled. "She used to come in here all the time. Always bought the good chocolate and magazines about business. Said she was keeping up with the world for when you needed her advice." Mom had never seemed particularly interested in business or finance when I was growing up. She'd been a school librarian, practical and quiet, more concerned with books than investment strategies. Maybe I'd never really known her as well as I thought. Driving home, I decided to tackle that strange section of siding I'd noticed the night before. Armed with a flashlight and my growing sense of determination, I examined the area more closely. The boards were definitely newer, though weathered to match the rest of the house. More interesting, they seemed to cover what might have been a window at some point. I found a crowbar in Mom's garden shed and carefully pried at the edges. The wood came away easier than expected, revealing not a window, but a small door. Behind it was a space I'd never known existed, a hidden compartment built into the wall between two rooms. My hands trembled as I shined the flashlight inside. There, wrapped in plastic and sitting on a wooden shelf, was a metal box about the size of a shoebox. My heart pounded as I carefully extracted it and brought it inside to examine under proper lighting. The box was a small safe, the kind people use for important documents. It had a combination lock with 4 numbers. I tried Mom's birthday first, nothing. Then my birthday, also nothing. I sat staring at the safe, wondering what Mom could have hidden and why she'd never mentioned it. On impulse, I tried the date she'd inherited the house from her own mother. Still nothing. Then I remembered something. When I was little, Mom always said our family's lucky number was the date she and Dad got married. I'd forgotten about it completely until this moment, but she used to joke that everything good in our lives happened on the 23rd of months. With shaking fingers, I entered 80823, August 23rd, their wedding anniversary. The safe clicked open. Inside was an envelope with my name written in Mom's careful handwriting. Below it were documents I couldn't immediately identify and what looked like jewelry boxes. But it was the envelope that drew my attention. It felt thick, substantial, like it contained more than just a letter. I opened it carefully and unfolded several pages of Mom's familiar script. The first line made my hands shake. "My dearest Miranda, if you're reading this, then you found your way home and discovered what I've been saving for you all these years." I stopped reading and looked around the quiet house. What had Mom been saving? And how had she known I would need it? Outside, the mountain wind whistled through the trees, and I felt like I was about to discover that everything I thought I knew about my mother was wrong. My hands trembled as I continued reading Mom's letter by the light of her old table lamp. "Miranda, I need you to understand something about our family that I never felt you were ready to hear. Your father and I weren't just librarians and teachers like you believed. Before you were born, we built something together. Something I've been protecting for you your entire life." I set the letter down, trying to process what she was telling me. Mom and Dad had always seemed so ordinary, so predictable. Dad died when I was 15, and I'd always thought of him as just a high school history teacher who loved books and fishing. Your father was brilliant with investments. He started small, using his teacher's salary to buy stocks and bonds that everyone else overlooked. I helped him research companies, analyze their potential, and we gradually built a portfolio that grew beyond our wildest dreams. But we lived simply, deliberately. We wanted you to understand the value of hard work and education, not grow up entitled because of money you didn't earn. The letter continued for 2 pages, explaining how they'd hidden their wealth, living modestly while their investments multiplied. They'd set up trusts, purchased properties under different names, and carefully documented everything for the day I might need it. But why hadn't they told me? We watched you fall in love with Richard and saw how he tried to control you. Your father wanted to intervene, but I convinced him to wait. I hoped you would find your strength on your own. When you didn't, when you gave up your career to serve his ambitions, I knew we needed a different plan. If something happened to us, if you ever found yourself alone and powerless, you would need resources he couldn't touch or even know about. My mother had been playing chess while I was playing checkers. She'd seen through Richard's charm 15 years before I did, and prepared for the exact situation I now faced. The woman I'd thought of as a simple small-town librarian had been secretly building my escape route for decades. I looked at the documents beneath the letter. Stock certificates, bond records, bank account information for institutions I'd never heard of. The numbers were staggering, even accounting for changes in value over the years. Mom had left me assets worth well over $2 million. But there was more. Beneath the financial documents were jewelry boxes containing pieces I'd never seen Mom wear, diamond earrings, pearl necklaces, a watch that looked suspiciously expensive, and beneath those, an insurance policy with my name as beneficiary. The payout amount made my breath catch, $3.7 million. The last item in the safe was a key attached to a business card for a bank in the county seat, 40 minutes away. Written in Mom's handwriting was Safety Deposit Box 247. Everything else is there. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing every document, trying to understand the scope of what Mom had built. She'd been methodical, careful, and incredibly smart about hiding assets while staying completely legal. Every investment was documented, every transaction recorded, every tax return filed properly. Around midnight, I found myself laughing through tears at the sheer audacity of it all. While Richard had been congratulating himself on building his business empire, my supposedly simple mother had been quietly assembling an empire of her own, and she'd done it all to make sure I would never be trapped or powerless. But the most incredible part was yet to come. At the bottom of the letter, Mom had written, "Miranda, I know you think your economics degree was wasted, but it wasn't. You have the knowledge to manage these assets, grow them, and build the life you deserve. Your father always said you had his mind for numbers and my patience for long-term planning. It's time to prove him right." The next morning, I called Patricia to request a personal day. "I need to handle some family business," I explained, which was technically true. Then I drove to County National Bank with the key and Mom's identification documents. The safety deposit box contained even more surprises. Additional stock certificates, real estate deeds for properties I'd never known existed, and detailed instructions Mom had written for converting liquid assets into working capital. She'd even included business plans for 3 different investment strategies, depending on my comfort level with risk. But the real shock came when I reviewed the property deeds. Mom owned 4 rental properties in the valley, a small office building in town, and had mineral rights on over 300 acres of mountain land. The rental income alone would have supported a comfortable lifestyle. She'd been quietly collecting wealth for 30 years while everyone, including me, thought she was just getting by on a teacher's pension. Sitting in the bank's private room, surrounded by evidence of my mother's secret financial genius, I felt something shift inside me. The helpless, defeated woman who'd left that courthouse a week ago was gone. In her place was someone with resources, knowledge, and for the first time in years, real power. Richard had no idea what was coming. And after what he'd put me through, after taking my children and trying to leave me with nothing, I was going to enjoy every minute of showing him exactly who Miranda Foster really was. The transformation didn't happen overnight. But it began the moment I walked out of that bank. I spent the next 3 days reviewing every document, every investment, every piece of the financial puzzle Mom had left me. She hadn't just saved money, she'd built a sophisticated portfolio that any professional investor would respect. My first priority was liquidating enough assets to establish immediate financial stability. I contacted the investment firm that managed Mom's accounts and scheduled a meeting. The advisor, a man named Thomas Parker, treated me with the respect that comes with having a substantial portfolio rather than the condescension I'd grown accustomed to as Richard's unemployed ex-wife. "Your mother was remarkable," Thomas said, reviewing her investment history. "She had an intuitive understanding of market patterns that most of my professional clients lack. These positions she selected 15 years ago are still outperforming the market today. Within a week, I had access to liquid funds that solved every immediate problem. I paid off the tiny mortgage remaining on the country house, upgraded the electrical and plumbing, and hired contractors to make it truly livable. More importantly, I established new bank accounts that Richard's lawyers could never access or even discover. But money was only part of the equation. I needed to rebuild my professional credentials and establish my independence in ways that would impress a family court judge. The part-time bank job had been a good start, but I was capable of much more. I called my old supervisor from the financial planning firm where I'd worked before marriage. "Miranda Foster," he said, sounding surprised. "I heard you got married and moved away. How have you been?" When I explained my situation carefully, omitting the details about my newfound wealth, he was sympathetic and practical. "The industry has changed a lot in 10 years, he admitted. "But your foundation is solid. Have you considered getting certified as a financial advisor? There's good demand for independent planners, especially in rural areas where the big firms don't have offices." He connected me with a certification program that could be completed online in 6 months. With my economics background and Mom's detailed records to study, I felt confident about tackling the coursework. More importantly, it would demonstrate to any judge that I was building a legitimate career, not just surviving on alimony. The children remained my biggest challenge and my primary motivation. Richard allowed supervised visits once a week, monitored by a court-appointed observer who took notes on every interaction. Emma seemed confused and angry, struggling to understand why I couldn't come home. Tyler was quieter, more withdrawn, but still climbed into my lap the moment he saw me. "Daddy says you can't take care of us anymore," Emma said during our third visit, her voice matter-of-fact in the way only 8-year-olds can manage. "He says you don't have a job or a house." I chose my words carefully, aware that everything I said would be reported back to Richard's lawyers. "I have a house now, sweetheart. The one where Grandma used to live. And I'm starting a new job helping people with their money. It's what I studied in college before you were born. Can we see your house?" Tyler asked hopefully. But the court order meant visits could only happen in neutral locations under supervision. Richard's strategy was working perfectly, keeping me isolated from my children while he built his case that I was an unfit mother. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my old college roommate Sarah, who was now a successful attorney in the city. "Miranda," she exclaimed, "I've been wondering what happened to you. You just disappeared after graduation." I explained my situation, the divorce, the custody battle, and my need for legal advice about challenging Richard's narrative. Sarah listened without judgment, then asked pointed questions about my financial situation and timeline. "You need to be strategic about this," she said finally. "Courts are reluctant to change custody arrangements quickly, but they will reconsider if you can demonstrate significant improvement in your circumstances. Document everything. Your income, your housing situation, your career development, and whatever you do. Don't let his lawyers know about any assets until you're ready to reveal them." Sarah's advice aligned perfectly with what I'd already begun planning. I would rebuild my professional reputation, establish myself as a competent single mother, and only then reveal the full extent of my resources. Let Richard think he'd left me powerless while I quietly assembled everything I needed to take him down. The best part was that I was genuinely enjoying the process. After years of managing Richard's schedule and entertaining his business associates, using my mind for analytical thinking felt like waking up from a long sleep. I'd forgotten how much I loved solving complex problems and creating long-term strategies. 3 months into my new life, I received an unexpected call. Patricia from the bank wanted to discuss expanding my role. "You've impressed several of our larger account holders," she explained. "They're asking specifically for you when they need investment advice. Would you be interested in taking on more responsibility?" The promotion came with a substantial salary increase and flexible scheduling that would accommodate my certification studies. More importantly, it provided exactly the kind of professional progress that would strengthen my custody case. But the real surprise came when I reviewed my first quarter investment returns. Following Mom's strategies and applying my own analysis, I'd grown my portfolio by 12% in just 3 months. I wasn't just managing inherited wealth. I was actively building it. Richard had always told me I didn't understand business, that I was too emotional and impractical for financial decisions. As I reviewed the numbers, proving him wrong, I realized something profound. I wasn't just getting my life back. I was discovering who I'd always been capable of becoming. And I was just getting started. 6 months after discovering Mom's letter, I was a different person entirely. The scared, defeated woman who'd fled Richard's courthouse victory was gone. In her place stood someone who woke up each morning energized by challenges instead of overwhelmed by them. My certification program was nearly complete, and I'd already begun taking independent clients at the bank. Word spread quickly in our small community about the new financial advisor who actually listened to people's concerns and explained complex concepts in plain English. My client base grew from Patricia's referrals to word-of-mouth recommendations that kept me booked weeks in advance. But the real victory came when I purchased the office building in town that Mom had secretly owned for years. Instead of continuing to rent it out, I decided to renovate the ground floor into my own financial planning practice. The space had been a defunct insurance office, but I could envision exactly what it would become. Professional, welcoming, and completely mine. The renovation project connected me with local contractors, business owners, and community leaders who saw me as an up-and-coming professional rather than Richard's discarded ex-wife. For the first time in years, I was building relationships based on my own merit and accomplishments. "You're really doing it," Mrs. Henderson said, watching the construction crew install new windows. "Your mother would be so proud. She always said you had more fight in you than you realized." My supervised visits with the children had evolved into longer, less formal meetings. The court observer, a kind woman named Ruth, had noted in her reports that both children seemed happy and secure during our time together. Emma had begun asking more questions about my new house and job, while Tyler had started making plans for when Mommy has her own home again. Richard seemed increasingly frustrated by my transformation. Our brief interactions during custody exchanges revealed a man who'd expected me to crumble and instead found someone thriving. His attempts to intimidate or manipulate me fell flat against my newfound confidence. "I don't know what game you're playing, Miranda," he said after one particularly unsuccessful attempt to provoke an emotional reaction. "But this independent woman act won't impress anyone where it matters." The most satisfying moment came when I attended Emma's school conference as her non-custodial parent. Her teacher, Mrs. Collins, commented on the improvement in Emma's mood and academic performance over the past few months. "She talks about you constantly," Mrs. Collins shared. "Your new job, your house, how proud she is that you help people with their money. Whatever you're doing, it's having a positive impact on her emotional well-being." The validation meant everything, but more importantly, it provided documentation that would support my eventual custody challenge. That evening, I stood in my renovated kitchen, reviewing financial statements and planning strategies for my growing business. The house that had once seemed like a symbol of failure now felt like home. Mom's furniture, which I'd initially seen as outdated reminders of the past, had become comfort objects that connected me to her wisdom and foresight. I opened her letter again, reading the final paragraph I'd memorized, but still found meaningful. "Miranda, you have everything you need to build the life you deserve. The money is just a tool. Your real power comes from understanding your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. Trust yourself. Trust your education. And trust that I knew exactly what I was doing when I prepared all of this for you. Looking around at everything I'd accomplished in 6 months, I finally understood what she meant. The inheritance had given me opportunities, but the transformation had come from rediscovering capabilities I'd abandoned to please Richard. I wasn't just financially independent. I was intellectually, emotionally, and professionally independent in ways I'd never experienced before. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my attorney friend. Ready to file the custody modification petition? Your documentation looks impressive. I typed back, yes, it's time. The legal battle ahead would be challenging, but I was no longer the powerless woman who'd lost everything in that first courtroom. Richard had made a crucial error when he dismissed me as unemployable and incompetent. He'd underestimated not just my determination, but my actual abilities. Soon he would discover that the mouse he'd been toying with had grown into something much more formidable. As I prepared for bed in the house that was truly mine, surrounded by evidence of the life I'd built from nothing, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. My children deserved a mother who knew her own worth. And finally, they were going to get one. Tomorrow, I would make the call that would change everything. But tonight, I was simply grateful to Mom for seeing what I couldn't see and preparing for what I couldn't imagine. The real battle was about to begin. But I'd already won the war that mattered most, the one against my own doubt. The custody modification hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 1 year after Richard had destroyed my life in the same courthouse. This time, I walked through those doors wearing a tailored navy suit I'd purchased with my own money, carrying a briefcase full of documentation that told a very different story than the one Richard expected. Sarah met me in the hallway, looking competent and sharp in her attorney mode. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, reviewing her notes one final time. "Remember, stay calm no matter what his lawyers try to pull. Your transformation speaks for itself, but your composure will seal the deal." Richard sat across the courtroom with his high-priced legal team, looking every bit the successful businessman in his expensive suit. But something was different about his demeanor. Gone was the smug confidence he'd displayed during our divorce proceedings. In its place was tension I'd never seen before, like a man who suspected the game had changed but didn't understand the new rules. Judge Morrison, the same judge who'd awarded Richard custody a year ago, reviewed our case files with careful attention. "Mrs. Hartwell, I see you've requested a modification of the custody arrangement based on substantial changes in circumstances. Please present your evidence." Sarah stood and began methodically presenting my case. Employment history showing consistent advancement at the bank. Client testimonials praising my financial advisory services. Documentation of my completed certification and growing independent practice. Bank statements proving stable, substantial income. Photos and inspection reports of my renovated home, complete with separate bedrooms for each child. But the real bombshell came when Sarah presented my investment portfolio statements. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hartwell has not only achieved financial stability, she has demonstrated exceptional financial acumen. Her investment returns over the past year are in the top percentile of professional money managers." I watched Richard's face as the numbers were read aloud. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to something approaching panic. He'd spent a year believing I was struggling to survive on my part-time bank salary. The reality of my financial position was clearly devastating to his narrative. His lead attorney, Marcus Webb, requested a brief recess to confer with his client. Through the conference room's glass door, I could see Richard gesticulating frantically while his lawyers tried to calm him down. When they returned, Webb's strategy was predictably desperate. "Your Honor," Webb began. "We question the source of these alleged assets. Mrs. Hartwell had no financial resources at the time of the divorce. Where did this money come from?" Sarah was ready for this line of attack. She presented Mom's death certificate, the inheritance documentation, and proof that every asset had been legally transferred and properly reported to tax authorities. "Mrs. Hartwell inherited these assets from her late mother," Sarah explained calmly. "Every transaction has been documented and verified by certified public accountants. There is nothing suspicious or hidden about these funds." Webb tried a different angle. Even if these assets are legitimate, sudden wealth doesn't qualify someone to be a primary parent. Mr. Hartwell has provided stable, consistent care for the children for over a year. That's when I asked permission to address the court directly. Judge Morrison nodded and I stood, feeling calmer than I had any right to feel in such a crucial moment. Your Honor, a year ago, I was a different person. I had allowed my marriage to define me so completely that I lost sight of my own capabilities. The divorce, as painful as it was, forced me to rediscover who I am and what I'm capable of achieving. I looked directly at Richard as I continued. I'm not asking for custody because I inherited money. I'm asking for custody because I've proven I can build a stable, independent life that serves my children's best interests. I've rebuilt my career, established financial security, and created a home where Emma and Tyler can thrive. Judge Morrison asked pointed questions about my work schedule, childcare arrangements, and long-term financial planning. I answered each one competently, drawing on months of preparation and genuine expertise I developed through my practice. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Ruth, the court-appointed supervisor, had been subpoenaed to testify about her observations during my visits with the children. Over the past year, I've observed significant positive changes in both children during their time with their mother, Ruth testified. Mrs. Hartwell has demonstrated patience, emotional stability, and genuine engagement with Emma and Tyler's needs. The children consistently express happiness about their visits and frequently mention their excitement about spending more time at their mother's house. Richard's team tried to discredit Ruth's observations, but her professional credentials and detailed documentation made their attacks ineffective. When Webb suggested that my financial success was somehow suspicious or temporary, Judge Morrison cut him off. Counselor, Mrs. Hartwell has presented comprehensive evidence of career advancement, professional certification, stable housing, and substantial financial resources. Unless you have specific evidence of wrongdoing, your client's custody arrangement is not permanent simply because it was the original decision. The hearing concluded with both sides presenting their final arguments. Webb painted me as an opportunist who'd suddenly discovered motherhood after inheriting money. Sarah presented me as a woman who'd overcome adversity to build exactly the kind of stable, nurturing environment children need. Judge Morrison announced he would review all evidence and render his decision within 2 weeks. As we left the courthouse, Richard cornered me in the parking lot, his composure finally cracking completely. I don't know how you pulled this off, Miranda, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. But money doesn't make you a better mother. Emma and Tyler have been happy with me. You're disrupting their lives for your own ego. I looked at the man who'd once controlled every aspect of my existence and felt nothing but pity. Richard, they're my children, too. And unlike you, I'm not trying to keep them from their other parent. I'm trying to give them a mother who knows her own worth. 2 weeks felt like 2 years, but Judge Morrison's call finally came on a Friday afternoon while I was meeting with clients at my new office. Mrs. Hartwell, I've reached my decision regarding your custody modification request. Could you be in my chambers Monday morning at 9? That weekend was the longest of my life. I cleaned my house obsessively, prepared Emma's and Tyler's rooms for the 3rd time, and reviewed every possible scenario with Sarah. He wouldn't call you in just to deny the request, she reassured me. Denials usually come by mail. Face-to-face meetings suggest he wants to discuss the terms. Monday morning arrived with the first snow of winter, covering the mountain roads in a white blanket that felt like a fresh start. I drove carefully to the courthouse, my heart pounding with anticipation and hope I was afraid to fully embrace. Judge Morrison's chambers were less formal than the courtroom, with family photos on his desk and law books lining the walls. Richard and his attorney were already seated when Sarah and I arrived. Richard looked haggard, like he'd spent the weekend wrestling with demons I could only imagine. I've reviewed all the evidence presented, Judge Morrison began, and I'm prepared to modify the custody arrangement. Mrs. Hartwell, you've demonstrated remarkable personal and professional growth over the past year. Your financial stability, career development, and housing situation clearly meet the court's standards for primary custody. The words hit me like a physical blow of pure relief. I'd won. After a year of supervised visits and legal battles, I was getting my children back. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished. However, I'm implementing a gradual transition schedule to minimize disruption to Emma and Tyler. For the next month, they'll spend weekends with you. After that, assuming the transition goes smoothly, they'll live with you during the week and spend alternate weekends with their father. Richard's attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, this is a dramatic change for children who have been stable in their father's care for over a year. But Judge Morrison's mind was made up. Mr. Webb, your client argued during the original proceedings that Mrs. Hartwell was financially incapable of providing for the children. She has not only overcome that challenge, but exceeded expectations. The children deserve the opportunity to have a meaningful relationship with both parents. As we left the courthouse, I felt a mixture of triumph and trepidation. I'd won the legal battle, but the real challenge was about to begin. How would Emma and Tyler adjust to living with me again? How would I balance my growing business with full-time parenting? And how would Richard handle losing control of the situation? The first weekend went better than I dared hope. Emma spent Saturday afternoon helping me organize her new bedroom, chattering excitedly about which friends she wanted to invite for sleepovers. Tyler was quieter, but seemed genuinely happy to be sleeping in his own space again. Mommy, are we going to live here forever now? Emma asked as I tucked her in Saturday night. The question was loaded with hope and anxiety in equal measure. We're going to live here as long as you want to, sweetheart, I promised. This is our home now. But even as I said the words, I knew Richard wouldn't give up easily. Men like him don't accept defeat gracefully, especially when it comes to losing control over people they consider their property. My suspicions proved correct the following week when Patricia called me into her office at the bank. Miranda, we need to discuss something sensitive, she said, looking uncomfortable. I received a call from someone claiming to be investigating your financial background. They were asking about your salary, your client relationships, and whether the bank was aware of your significant unreported income. The harassment was beginning. Richard couldn't challenge the custody decision directly, so he was trying to undermine my professional reputation. What did you tell them? I asked. Nothing, of course. I told them all employee information is confidential and hung up. But Miranda, you should know they also contacted several of your clients with similar questions. The strategy was transparently vindictive, but potentially effective. If Richard could convince people that my financial success was somehow illegitimate, he might be able to damage my business and create grounds for another custody challenge. I called Sarah immediately to discuss legal options for stopping the harassment. This is actually good news, she said after hearing the details. If we can prove Richard is behind this, we can file for sanctions and possibly have his visitation restricted for engaging in behavior harmful to the children's best interests. But proving Richard's involvement would be challenging. He was too smart to conduct the harassment himself, and his resources allowed him to hire private investigators who operated in legal gray areas. I needed a different strategy. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing client files and considering my options. My business was growing rapidly, but it was still vulnerable to reputation attacks. I'd worked too hard rebuilding my life to let Richard destroy it through whisper campaigns and anonymous accusations. Then I remembered something Mom had written in her letter about building alliances and protecting yourself through community connections. I'd been so focused on individual success that I'd overlooked the power of professional networks and mutual support. The next morning, I called a meeting with Patricia, my accountant, and 2 other local business owners I'd developed relationships with through my financial planning practice. I explained the situation honestly, including my suspicions about Richard's involvement in the harassment. This kind of behavior is unacceptable, said Janet, who owned the town's largest real estate agency. We've all seen how hard you've worked to establish yourself. Anyone trying to undermine that is attacking our entire business community. What emerged from that meeting was an informal network of mutual protection. Business leaders who knew my character and work quality would refer anyone asking suspicious questions to Patricia, who would document the inquiries and report them to Sarah. More importantly, they would actively recommend my services to their own clients and contacts. You're not alone in this, Patricia assured me. We all know what it's like to build something from nothing. We're not going to let someone tear it down through lies and intimidation. For the first time since discovering Richard's harassment campaign, I felt genuinely confident about weathering the storm. But I also began planning something Richard wouldn't expect. If he wanted to play games with my reputation, I would make sure he understood exactly who he was messing with. The scared, dependent woman he divorced was gone forever. In her place stood someone with resources, allies, and a very clear understanding of how power actually works. Richard's harassment campaign intensified over the next month, but it was having the opposite effect he'd intended. Instead of destroying my reputation, his transparent attempts at sabotage were generating sympathy and support from the business community. People who might have remained neutral were taking sides, and they weren't choosing his. The breaking point came when one of my elderly clients, Mrs. Patterson, called me in tears. "Miranda, dear, someone came to my house claiming to be from the state tax department. They said you were under investigation for financial crimes and that I needed to provide documentation of all services you've performed for me." The impersonation of a government official crossed a legal line that even Richard's expensive lawyers couldn't protect him from. I immediately contacted Sarah, who filed a complaint with both local police and the state attorney general's office. "He's gotten sloppy," she said with satisfaction. "Desperation makes people stupid." But while we pursued legal remedies, I decided to implement a more direct solution. I'd learned enough about Richard's business over our 10 years of marriage to know where his vulnerabilities lay. If he wanted to play dirty, I was prepared to remind him that I knew exactly where all his bodies were buried. Richard's construction company had grown successful, partly through connections with city planning officials and zoning board members. What most people didn't know was that several of these relationships involved arrangements that skated very close to ethical violations. I'd organized enough dinner parties and charity events to know which officials received unusual favors from Richard's company. I called my accountant, David, and scheduled a private meeting. "I need you to help me understand something," I said, pulling out financial records I'd kept from my marriage. "Look at these charitable donations Richard made during our marriage. Do any of them seem unusual to you?" David reviewed the documents with the thoroughness that made him such a valuable professional ally. "These donations to the Municipal Development Fund are interesting," he said. "That's not a registered charity. It appears to be a political action committee with very limited public reporting requirements." Further investigation revealed that Richard's charitable giving had primarily benefited a PAC that funded campaigns for local officials who subsequently awarded his company lucrative municipal contracts. While not technically illegal, the arrangement would be embarrassing if exposed and potentially damaging to both Richard and the officials involved. I made copies of all relevant documents and scheduled a meeting with Richard at a neutral location, the coffee shop where I'd once felt so vulnerable during my brother's unexpected visit. This time, I was the one controlling the agenda. Richard arrived looking confident, probably expecting another opportunity to intimidate or manipulate me. He sat across from me with the same smug expression he'd worn during our divorce proceedings, clearly believing he still held all the advantages. "Miranda, I'm glad you called," he began. "I think we need to discuss this custody situation rationally. The children are confused by all these changes, and I'm concerned about the influence of your sudden wealth on their values." I smiled and opened my briefcase, removing a folder of documents. "Richard, I want to discuss something else entirely. I've been reviewing our old tax returns and I found some interesting patterns in your charitable giving." His expression shifted from confidence to confusion as I laid out photocopies of donation records, PAC reports, and contract awards. I watched understanding dawn on his face as he realized what I'd discovered and how damaging it could be if made public. "These donations aren't illegal," he said carefully. "But I imagine the voters who elected your friends on the city council might find them interesting, especially if the information appeared in the local newspaper along with a timeline of subsequent contract awards to your company." Richard's face paled as he understood the implications. His business reputation, political connections, and financial success all depended on maintaining relationships that couldn't survive public scrutiny of their ethical foundations. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I want you to stop harassing my clients and employees. I want you to cease all attempts to investigate or undermine my business, and I want you to accept that our custody arrangement is final and non-negotiable." I leaned forward, maintaining steady eye contact. "In return, these documents remain private, and your political friends never learn that their relationship with you has been documented." The silence stretched between us for several long moments. Richard was realizing that the powerless ex-wife he'd dismissed had become someone capable of destroying everything he'd built. The role reversal was so complete it was almost amusing. "You've changed, Miranda," he said finally, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and resentment. "Yes, I have," I agreed. "I've learned to value myself and protect what matters to me, including my children and my business." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "You know, I actually preferred you when you were weak and dependent." "I know you did, Richard. That was always the problem." After he left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, processing what had just happened. I'd successfully neutralized Richard's harassment campaign and established clear boundaries he wouldn't dare cross. But more importantly, I'd proven to myself that I could stand up to the man who'd once controlled every aspect of my life. The scared woman who'd lost everything in divorce court was truly gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood that real power came not from controlling others, but from knowing your own worth and refusing to accept less than you deserved. The children's transition to living with me full-time went more smoothly than I dared hope. Emma threw herself into decorating her room and making new friends in our neighborhood, while Tyler gradually came out of his shell and began talking about school, friends, and the future with enthusiasm I hadn't seen in months. But the real test came 6 weeks into our new arrangement when Tyler had a nightmare and called for me instead of asking for his father. I found him sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face, reaching for comfort he now trusted I would provide. "I dreamed that Daddy took us away again and we couldn't find you," he whispered as I held him close. The fear in his voice broke my heart, but it also confirmed that my children felt secure in our home in ways they hadn't experienced during the past year. "That's not going to happen, sweetheart," I promised. "This is our home and nobody can take you away from me anymore." As I sat with Tyler until he fell back asleep, I realized that winning custody had been just the beginning. The real victory was creating an environment where my children felt safe, valued, and free to be themselves. My business continued to flourish beyond anything I'd imagined possible when I'd started working part-time at the bank. Word of mouth brought new clients weekly, and I'd hired 2 part-time assistants to help manage the growing workload. The office building I'd inherited from Mom was fully renovated and housed not just my practice, but a small accounting firm and a legal aid clinic that served our rural community. But success brought new challenges. Several larger financial firms from the city had approached me about acquisition offers. And I'd received inquiries about franchising my business model. The attention was flattering, but also overwhelming for someone who'd been rebuilding her life just 2 years earlier. "You've created something special here," said Margaret Chen, a representative from Regional Financial Partners who'd driven up from the city to meet with me. "Your client retention rate and satisfaction scores are exceptional. We'd love to discuss bringing your operation under our umbrella." The offer was substantial enough to provide financial security for Emma, Tyler, and myself for life, but something about the conversation felt wrong, like surrendering control just when I'd finally learned to use it effectively. That evening, I called Mom's former financial advisor, Thomas Parker, to discuss the situation. "Miranda, acquisition offers are compliments, but they're also challenges," he said thoughtfully. "The question isn't whether you can make money by selling. The question is whether selling serves your long-term goals and values." I spent the weekend considering what I really wanted to achieve. Financial security was important, but I already had that through Mom's inheritance and my own growing wealth. Professional recognition was gratifying, but I'd proven my competence to everyone who mattered. What I discovered I valued most was independence, the ability to make decisions based on what was right for my clients, my children, and myself, rather than corporate expectations or shareholder demands. Monday morning, I called Margaret Chen and politely declined her acquisition offer. "I appreciate the opportunity, but I built something here that serves my community in ways that might not survive corporate restructuring. I'm not ready to give up that control." Her response surprised me. "I respect that decision, Miranda. But if you ever change your mind or if you'd be interested in consulting with our Rural Development Division, please stay in touch. You figured out something that a lot of big firms are struggling with." The conversation made me realize that my success hadn't gone unnoticed in professional circles I'd never imagined accessing. I was no longer just a local financial advisor. I was someone whose methods and results were attracting attention from industry leaders. But the most satisfying recognition came from an unexpected source. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Collins, requested a conference to discuss my daughter's progress. Emma has shown remarkable improvement in confidence and academic performance since moving in with you full-time, she said. But more importantly, she talks about you with such pride. She tells everyone that her mom helps people with their money and owns her own business. Hearing that my professional success was contributing to my daughter's self-esteem rather than detracting from our relationship felt like the ultimate validation. I'd spent years believing Richard's narrative that career ambition and good mothering were incompatible. Emma's pride in my accomplishments proved how wrong that assumption had been. That evening, as I helped Tyler with homework while Emma practiced piano, I felt a deep contentment that had nothing to do with financial success or professional recognition. I'd built a life that honored all aspects of who I was: mother, businesswoman, daughter, and community member. But the most profound realization came when Emma asked me about college planning during dinner. "Mom, when I go to college, will you help me pick classes like Grandma did for you?" The question revealed that my daughter saw education and career success as normal, expected parts of life rather than privileges she might have to sacrifice for family responsibilities. I'd broken a cycle that had constrained women in my family for generations. Emma would grow up assuming she could be both successful professionally and devoted to family because she'd seen it lived out in our daily life. That night, I sat in Mom's old chair on the front porch, watching snowfall on the mountain, and reflecting on how completely my life had transformed. 2 years earlier, I'd been powerless, financially dependent, and convinced I had nothing valuable to offer the world. Now I owned a thriving business, a beautiful home, and most importantly, I'd raised my children to believe in their own potential. Mom had been right about everything. The inheritance had given me opportunities, but the real transformation had come from rediscovering my own capabilities and refusing to accept anyone else's limitations on my potential. Spring brought unexpected complications that tested everything I'd built over the past 2 years. It started with a phone call from Richard's attorney requesting a meeting to discuss new developments in the custody situation. My stomach dropped, but I'd learned to trust my strength rather than give in to panic. Sarah accompanied me to Marcus Webb's office where Richard sat looking more confident than I'd seen him since losing custody. "Miranda, we need to discuss Emma and Tyler's living arrangements," Webb began. "My client has concerns about the stability of your current situation." Richard leaned forward, clearly eager to deliver whatever bombshell he'd prepared. "I know about your business problems, Miranda. Several clients have complained about your investment advice, and I've heard your office lease is in jeopardy. The children deserve better than instability." I looked at Sarah, confused. My business was thriving. My clients were satisfied, and I owned the building housing my office. Whatever Richard thought he knew was completely wrong, but his confidence suggested he believed his information was reliable. "Mr. Hartwell, what specific problems are you referring to?" Sarah asked. "We haven't received any formal complaints or legal notices regarding Mrs. Hartwell's business." Webb produced a folder of documents. "We have statements from 3 clients expressing dissatisfaction with Mrs. Hartwell's services. We also have documentation that her office building is facing foreclosure proceedings." As Sarah reviewed the documents, I realized what had happened. Someone had provided Richard with false information, probably the same private investigator who'd been harassing my clients months earlier. The client complaints were fabricated and the foreclosure notices were for a completely different property with a similar address. "These documents appear to contain significant inaccuracies," Sarah said after careful review. "The property address doesn't match Mrs. Hartwell's building, and these alleged client statements would need to be verified through proper legal channels." Richard's confidence wavered as he realized his information was flawed, but he pressed forward anyway. "Even if these specific issues are incorrect, Miranda's lifestyle isn't sustainable. She's living beyond her means, and when her luck runs out, my children will suffer." That's when I decided to end Richard's delusions once and for all. I asked Sarah to request a private conference room where I could show them documentation that would settle the matter permanently. In the conference room, I opened my briefcase and removed current financial statements, showing my investment portfolio, business revenue, and property holdings. The numbers were staggering. My net worth had grown to over $4 million through careful management of Mom's inheritance and reinvestment of my business profits. Richard, you've been operating under some serious misconceptions about my financial situation, I said, watching his face as he processed the numbers. This isn't luck or temporary success. This is the result of education, planning, and hard work. Webb studied the documents carefully, then looked at his client with barely concealed frustration. Mr. Hartwell, these figures indicate that Mrs. Hartwell is financially secure to a degree that makes your concerns about stability completely unfounded. But Richard wasn't ready to surrender. Money doesn't make someone a good parent, he said desperately. I provided consistent care for Emma and Tyler. Miranda is too focused on her business to give them proper attention. That accusation crossed a line that transformed my disappointment into genuine anger. Richard, in the 6 months since the children have been living with me, Emma's grades have improved. Tyler has joined the school soccer team, and both of them have made friends in our neighborhood. They're thriving because they have a mother who believes in their potential and shows them what it looks like to build something meaningful. Sarah presented additional documentation, school reports, teacher evaluations, and pediatrician records, all showing that the children were healthier, happier, and more successful since living with me full-time. Furthermore, Sarah continued, Mrs. Hartwell has established college funds for both children and created a trust that will provide for their education and future needs regardless of what happens to her business. That's not the behavior of someone who's financially irresponsible or too career-focused to consider her children's welfare. Webb requested a recess to confer with his client. Through the glass door, I could see Richard's animated gestures becoming increasingly desperate as he realized his latest strategy was failing completely. When they returned, Webb's tone was noticeably more conciliatory. Perhaps we can discuss a modified visitation schedule that addresses my client's concerns while maintaining the current custody arrangement. No, I said firmly. We're not modifying anything. The current arrangement is working perfectly for the children, and I won't disrupt their stability to accommodate Richard's inability to accept that I'm a successful parent and professional. Sarah reinforced my position with legal precedents, pointing out that Richard would need to demonstrate actual harm to the children to justify any custody changes. Given their improved academic and social performance, such a case would be impossible to make. As we prepared to leave, Richard made one final attempt at manipulation. Miranda, I'm just trying to protect our children. You've changed so much that I barely recognize you anymore. I stopped at the door and looked at him directly. You're right, Richard. I have changed. I've become the person I was always capable of being before I let you convince me I was worth less than I am. Our children are better off because of that change, whether you can accept it or not. Walking out of that office, I felt a profound sense of closure. Richard's attempts to undermine my custody, my business, and my confidence had failed completely. More importantly, I demonstrated to myself that I could face his challenges without fear or doubt about my own worth. The scared, dependent woman who'd lost everything in divorce court was truly gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood that real strength came from knowing your value and refusing to let anyone diminish it. And my children were learning that lesson by watching me live it every day. 1 year later, I stood in the conference room of my expanded office building, looking out at a view that never failed to inspire me. The business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible: 12 employees, offices in 3 towns, and a client base that included some of the most successful individuals and businesses in our region. But the real measure of success wasn't in the financial statements or professional accolades. It was in the sound of Emma practicing violin in the next room after school, while Tyler worked on homework at the desk I'd set up for him in my office. They'd both adapted beautifully to spending afternoons at my workplace, treating it as an extension of our home rather than an intrusion on our family time. Mom, Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you can help her grandson with college planning. Emma called from the reception area where she was helping organize client files. At 10 years old, she understood my business well enough to field simple questions and take detailed messages. The integration of my professional and personal life had happened naturally, creating a model of working motherhood that I wished I'd seen during my own childhood. My children were learning that meaningful work was a source of satisfaction and contribution rather than a burden that competed with family relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Federal court just ruled on the Patterson case. Your testimony was cited in the decision. Congratulations on changing employment law in 3 states. The message referred to a discrimination case where I testified as an expert witness about the financial impact of forcing women to choose between career and family. The ruling would make it easier for other women to challenge workplace policies that punished motherhood, but perhaps the most satisfying recognition had come from an unexpected source. The State University's business school had invited me to teach a graduate course in family financial planning, acknowledging my expertise in helping clients navigate the intersection of personal and professional goals. Professor Miranda, as Emma teasingly called me, would begin teaching in the fall while maintaining my practice and client relationships. The opportunity represented everything I'd fought for: professional respect, financial independence, and the ability to shape future generations of financial advisors. Richard had faded into the background of our lives, maintaining his scheduled visitation with the children, but no longer attempting to control or manipulate our arrangements. His business had struggled after several city council members lost re-election campaigns, weakening the political connections that had fueled his success. Meanwhile, my reputation for ethical practices and genuine client service had made my firm the preferred choice for anyone seeking financial guidance in our region. The children saw their father regularly and maintained a relationship with him, but they'd grown secure in the knowledge that their primary home was with me. Emma had started talking about studying business in college like Mom did, while Tyler showed an aptitude for mathematics that reminded me of my own childhood fascination with numbers and patterns. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table sharing highlights from our day, Tyler asked a question that revealed how completely our lives had transformed. "Mom, why did Daddy used to say you couldn't work? You're really good at your job." The innocent question from my 8-year-old son captured the absurdity of everything I'd once accepted as truth. Richard's narrative about my incompetence and unsuitability for professional life had been so thoroughly disproven that even a child could see through its false premises. Some people believe that taking care of a family means you can't do other important work, too, I explained carefully. But I've learned that being good at one thing often makes you better at other things. Taking care of you and Emma taught me skills I use in my business every day. After the children went to bed, I sat in Mom's old chair, now positioned in my home office, and reread the letter that had changed everything. Her words about trusting my education, understanding my worth, and building something true to myself had proven prophetic in ways I couldn't have imagined. But the most profound truth was one I'd discovered for myself. Real security didn't come from having money or professional success, though both were valuable. Real security came from knowing I could create value, solve problems, and build relationships based on mutual respect rather than dependency or control. I opened my laptop and began writing what would become my first article for the Harvard Business Review, Beyond the Glass Ceiling: How Personal Transformation Drives Professional Innovation. The piece would discuss how my experience rebuilding my life had led to new approaches in financial planning that better served clients facing major life transitions. As I wrote, I realized that my story wasn't really about divorce, custody battles, or even financial success. It was about discovering that the woman Richard had dismissed as unemployable and incompetent had always possessed the capabilities to build something meaningful and lasting. Mom had seen it. Mrs. Henderson had seen it. Even Patricia at the bank had seen it from our first conversation. The only person who hadn't seen it was me. Trapped as I was in a narrative that defined my worth through someone else's achievements and approval. But narratives can be rewritten and lives can be rebuilt. Sometimes it takes losing everything to discover what you're actually capable of creating. In my case, losing the life I thought I wanted had led me to build the life I was meant to live. The clock struck midnight as I finished the article, marking another day in a life that belonged entirely to me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to prove that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming the person you were always meant to be. And as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to check on my sleeping children, I felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought me home to myself.